Greetings. I'm Steve, and I'd like to thank you for joining the Architect and the Executive podcast, where we discuss technology, philosophy, leadership, personal development, and much more. The theme for each episode varies as we endeavor to examine various topics from our unique points of view. I hope you enjoy this episode of The Architect and the Executive. In this episode, we talk about mindfulness, meditation, and how to use both to improve your workday. We also talk about cognitive approaches to thought and why convergent and divergent thinking are important for everyone, especially for developers. Please enjoy this episode of The Architect and the Executive. Hey, Imran, how's it going? How you doing today?
Good. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing pretty well. It's been a pretty amazing week. A lot of things going on, and I'm excited that we have an opportunity to get together to talk about mindfulness, meditation, stoicism, and yoga. A little departure from what we've been doing. We've covered a lot of technology tracks so far, but I know both you and I are pretty big in on the mindfulness. It's a big part of what we do to keep being successful throughout the day. So I'm really excited to dive in.
Yeah, that's really awesome. What motivated me about this topic was exactly that. You and I talk about it a lot. We talk about meditation and being in a good space and in the whole mindfulness thing. And I came across this article, and it was a Harvard Business Review article, and we'll share it in the show notes here. But it talked about, how mindfulness can help engineers solve problems. And so that really stood out to me. And I was like, oh, this is really a thing. Obviously I feel the benefits of it. I've never really looked too deep into the science of it on that end, right? And it's something that, people are actually talking about. And as I read through the article, it went through many tenets that I think that we're going to touch on today that are really useful to how we operate in our day.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, just touching on meditation a little bit, you hear a lot about it and people are like, oh yeah, I meditate or I do this. And I think there's a lot of misconception that meditation is all about sitting in a quiet room and doing some sort of chanting. And it's really...
Or in a cave, in the mountains somewhere.
That's right. Yeah, you don't have to go to a place of solitude to find solitude, right? I sit most of the time when I meditate in the same place where I'm recording this podcast from. I use the same location, I typically sit in a chair, sometimes on the floor. I'm trying to be comfortable and just find a few minutes to relax and let my thinking process flow through whatever it might be. I'm trying maybe to focus on a specific topic or a thought or joyfulness or being grateful, but other things are going to happen. And it's not about forcing those to go away. It's about accepting them and then moving on to the next, getting back into that set that I was looking for, that mindset that I wanted to be in. How do you approach meditation? Like what's your typical day look like, or how do you sit down to meditate?
So I generally like to start my day off with a lengthy meditation. By lengthy, I mean 20, 30 minutes. It's nothing ridiculously crazy, right?
Sure.
And for me, that helps me get into the right mindset for the day. One of the things, as you mentioned, meditation doesn't take going off to solitude or anything like that, but it also doesn't require a lot of time. It can be done in 1-minute intervals. And the idea of the mindfulness is really to bring you back into the present moment, right? Often as we're going through our day, there's lots of things happening, lots of streams happening, and we're in the past and we're in the future as we're trying to figure out what happened here and what's going to happen there.
Right.
And really the mindfulness aspect is really about how do you bring yourself back into this moment? And it just could be 1 minute in the middle of the day of closing your eyes and just bringing yourself here and focusing on your breath. It's really focusing on your breathing just for 60 seconds, right?
Yeah, that's big. I don't think a lot of people really ever think about that. But if you were to just take a moment, sit quietly and inhale and feel where the breath is, like where do you feel it? For me, I focus on the tip of my nose. I breathe in through my nose, out through my mouth when I meditate. And I can feel that incoming breath on the tip of my nose. And I know that helps me center and focus. It's super silly, but it helps me to focus right away that, oh, this is where I want to be. This is exactly what I'm looking at, no farther than the front part of my body. And I want everything focused in on that breath. I don't want to think about the next one, just the one that I'm in, hold it for a second, and then let it back out. Nice and deep, nice and slow. It helps me to to let go. Maybe you get an email that's like, oh, I can't believe that this meeting got changed, or I got invited to another thing, or this or that, whatever it might be, something that pops up that's a distraction. And I'm certain that everyone listening to this gets those distractions. But a 60-second recenter like that, to just take a few deep breaths, you don't need an app for that. You don't need anything. You just sit down, breathe through 7 breaths. Try to count 7 breaths in a row and see if you can. You'll probably get lost around 3 or 4, and your mind will have wandered to something else. Like it was a crazy challenge that I saw on somebody talking about meditation on a video. And he's like, if you can get to 7, then you know you're starting to get there. And I was like, no problem. 3rd breath, I had no idea where I was. I already had 17 other things going on in my mind. So what else do you think about when you think about mindfulness and preparing for your day and being effective in your day?
So how I apply this, in our job, we're programmers, engineers, and those things lend to this very analytical, logically focused mind. And we're known for that, right? And a lot of engineers are known for that those are your strengths of your brain. You're analytical. You can logically process things. I mean, literally the stuff we code is called logic, right?
True.
And so when you think about it, right, well, when you want to solve problems, you need to be creative. You need to use other parts of your mind, which can help you think of multiple things. So that takes us into the concept of divergent thinking and convergent thinking. And when we want to generate ideas and think of unique solutions to problems or different ways to do things with what we currently have, we need that divergent thinking. And one of the things that's there is that mindfulness and being able to be in the present moment will help you be a better divergent thinker, right? And when I think about some of these things. So one of the things what is convergent thinking, divergent thinking, and how do you break it out, right? So convergent thinking is very linear. It's a very linear, focused, analytical, logical way to look at something.
Is that
divergent
is convergent? That would be your list of how do I get from A to B, point A to point B, right? It's the very logical step of this is what I have to do. If I'm filling out a form, I start and I fill out my first name, then my last name, then my address, and then I click submit, right? Like
it's
that
very,
kind of thing.
exactly.
It's process.
It follows the flow. Yeah. It's very, the guidelines are there.
Okay.
And so it's really all about getting multiple things narrowed down into a single solution and, asking why, right? And it's good to analyze ideas. But when you think of divergent thinking, it's more about scanning outward and generating multiple ideas, finding original ways to use materials or new ways to use materials that are there, right? And the first thing I thought of as I was reading this was MacGyver, right? We all remember the show MacGyver. Maybe some people do at this point or don't.
Well, yeah.
But if you remember MacGyver, he could basically get himself out of anything with like a paper clip and some old chewed up bubble gum and a shoestring.
True.
And the idea behind him is he's very divergent. He's the epitome of a divergent thinker, and that he can look at multiple possibilities and look at things and say, how can I use this in a different, more original way to help solve this problem, right? And so being able to think that way, and so as engineers in our day and kind of coming back to how we apply it to our day, we have to problem solve. We have to innovate all the time on everything that we're doing. And so there's this cycle, and you need both. It's not that one's better than the other. It's that you need to be able to do both, and making yourself a better divergent thinker will help you generate more ideas, think out of the box, and then you kind of get into this cycle where now you generate all these ideas, then you shift over into this more convergent thinking pattern where now you can analyze individual ideas and then go back out, look at more possibilities, and it's a cycle. So you definitely need both.
When I think about divergent thinking in that context, if you're doing idea generation, are you at the same time trying to judge the value or the validity or the potential possibilities of an idea? Or are you just trying to brainstorm as many things as you can come up with?
You're trying to think of as many things as you come up with, right? So you're definitely spreading that into multiple streams. I think once you get to that point and you say, now let's look at individual things and dive deeper into them, then you switch over to that more convergent process.
So once you've gotten that list, you might write down 100 different things that all maybe solve your problem, and then you can go back and evaluate. I know when you and I were talking before the show today, we were talking about the thinking hats of Edward de Bono. And that's actually what his whole thing is about, that you come into a situation, everybody can can visualize wearing different hats in a project or in a place or at a time. And if you're just going to go try to get into a mindset, put on a specific hat. So in his case, it I think would be the green hat for creative thinking. Don't worry about whether it's right or wrong, but put yourself in that mindset of just think about all the ways you could go and solve a problem. And that's something that I know you and I do a lot of. We will sit down on a whiteboard, usually a virtual whiteboard. Pro tip, if you can use a Hangout and you have a phone that can show your whiteboard, it's an easy way to
virtual whiteboard.
To virtual whiteboard where you can each share a screen and see whiteboards. It's one of the things that works great for us.
Well, we really MacGyver it, right? Like you got your phone on one side, your webcam from your computer on the other, so I can see you, we can see each other's wife. It doesn't take a very complicated, expensive solution.
It doesn't.
We use the things that we had and we solved the problem. Yeah. How do we think better together?
I never thought about it that way, but that was a very MacGyvered situation, but it works. And it's allowed us to really dive into some deep thinking problems and whiteboard and erase it and whiteboard and not have to worry about, can you draw it on a fake whiteboard that's digital, right? But it's literally just, here it goes, all these things working.
You're spending too much time and energy trying to make sure you're using the app right. And it's just,
right.
And we'll do that later because we'll take our whiteboard diagrams and we'll turn them into proper, component or class diagrams, whatever they have to become.
Right.
But when we're thinking about the idea, we're not thinking about, am I using the right circle or moon or line or dashed line?
Right.
Because that's taking energy away from the problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah. I used to do, just thinking about that, I used to do mind mapping. That was my favorite thing for a very long time.
Yes, I remember that.
And then I realized that I was spending so much time making sure that my mind map looked pretty that I wasn't spending time focused on either the idea generation that I was using it for or the note taking or whatever it was. And I would go back and look at my mind maps and be like, oh man, the layout on the page of this is perfect. It's perfectly centered. And I used all the available space.
Very symmetrical.
Yeah. And they were beautiful. And I was like, oh, but I didn't take any notes about these 3 topics. I need to go, well, that doesn't fit on this mind map. And I realized I had an epiphany one day that wasn't the way to go. And you've seen my notes now. They are literally marked down. If it's a thing I need to just keep a note of, it's got a dash next to it. If it's a task, it's got a plus. And that's it. I don't go any farther. I just want to focus on taking the notes so that I can spend all of my energy in the divergent thinking, being creative. I wanted to touch on something just real quick about what you had said about engineers being considered very logical. And I know from other conversations that we've had that it's the business of or the process of developing software is really artistic. You are trying to find things that already exist. You take some pretty basic building blocks. How do I do a select from a database and iterate through it and turn it into something that's new to solve a business problem, right? You're taking some really concrete, small pieces and you're building something beautiful. And I think that's something, if you're going to take away a key learning point from this whole podcast, it would be, don't pigeonhole yourself as a developer to be, I'm only a logical thinker. I can only think in a linear way. It's not that. You do a lot of creative things, even though you might never be able to sit down and draw a superhero. You're making some pretty amazing things. When you draw out that architectural diagram, that's art, right? It doesn't have to use different shades. It doesn't need to be all sorts of, dotted pencil, whatever it might be. You're still building something that you're building out of different building blocks to make something new. And I think that's a key reminder for folks.
Right. Problem solving, as you say, is always a creative pursuit, regardless of whether the tool to solve the problem is in itself analytical or a logical tool, right?
Sure.
But you're applying these things in a different way. And when we look at us specifically, we look at the low-code environment, right? Because you're working with the full stack almost, and you have to be just as analytical as you are creative. Because not only are you doing database design, you're doing user experience design in the same tool.
All in the same place.
And you have to switch.
And you actually are, in the low code especially, you're going back and forth between the two because you, in most cases, your user experience heavily impacts what your database
driven
design,
by the data,
right?
And vice versa.
But they really have to come together to to build out that solution. I think that's a really good example of the convergent and divergent thinking coming together. Right here you are trying to design something that's pretty so that the user will want to use it, but it also still has to hold all the data together. It is that very linear, how do I get right through there? I think that's interesting.
Yeah, you have to definitely be able to use both sides of your brain in a sense to get through it. And the more you can be, like for me, the reason why it's kind of ironic, right? You know, if you look at my education, I studied design and I went to art school. I work and I'm successful as a programmer, as an engineer.
Right.
And it's because, you know, I learned how to program and I learned how to go through the design creative process as well.
Right.
And for me to be able to find a way to intersect those two has really led to a lot of, you know, my success in life and in the places I've been able to go.
And it's funny that you say that because when I went to school, I went for chemistry. Well, I started with biology, but switched to chemistry, mostly because I really liked to, you know, set things on fire in chemistry. Boy, probably shouldn't admit that. Really enjoyed that. And then I got into programming because it was something I'd always enjoyed. I started programming when I was young, like 10 years old, started doing things. And I found enjoyment in building things and being able to take a logical structure and turn it into a program that could do something else. Like that was great. And then the ability to turn that into a way for people to search for houses, right? Going back to homeseekers.com and taking a whole bunch of data that was all put together in a way and then building a search interface that was easy to use. That was fun. Like that was a big high for me. Like I loved the thought that so many people were using something that I helped to build to go find a home. Like that was really cool. That's definitely not, you know, convergent thinking. That is not a linear thing at all. It was very much a design objective and a design goal for me. And then, you know, I took my more technical side thinking, you know, in chemistry and science into the softer skills in management and trying to figure out how to deliver software. Right. And that's what I really enjoy now. How do we take a whole bunch of people that are really good at having that divergent thinking and being creative and funnel that creative energy into some pretty awesome software?
Right. So, you know, before we get into, now I want to talk about flow state. And as we're talking about this, and because you mentioned doing something you love, right? And it's a tenet of it, right? And, you know, if you haven't heard of flow state, it's this idea of getting yourself into this state of consciousness, basically being in the zone, right? A mental state and where you're basically fully immersed in what you're doing, you're completely energized, and you're enjoying the process of what you're doing. And if you can get into that state, then there's no limit to what you can produce, right?
But 100% agree, right?
Yeah.
This will sound very strange. I hope people understand what flow is, and we'll talk about it some more. Recently, I had a goal that I needed to write an access control policy, right? That sounds about as boring as you could get. I found myself in a flow state for about 3 hours where I knew what needed to happen. I knew what needed to be written. I was fully engaged in it. I was interested in what I was writing. I really wanted to see the outcome. It took me probably 3 full days to write the policy, but I wrote the outline and figured out all the pieces of it in about a 3-hour flow state where I just sat with my laptop and typed things out and hammered out the different sections and took out things I knew I wasn't going to need. And that was one of those things. After I got done, I was like, oh my God, it's been 3 hours. Like, how did that happen? I had no idea.
Because you're timeless.
Yeah.
When you're in the moment, you're timeless. Because this moment lasts for eternity, right? There's no end to it. There's no start to it, right? This moment is eternity. And if you can bring yourself into this moment, you could be timeless, right? So how do you, I want to look at some of these things. I know I said before I get into flow state, and then we started talking about flow state, but one of the things, you know, I found this awesome infographic as we were talking about being able to find solitude in during your workday, right? And we talked about it a little bit, and we talked a little bit about how you and I approach it. But, you know, as we go through this, and again, something we'll share in our show notes, but the first one up here, it just says schedule it in, right? Set aside 15 minutes each day to spend time with yourself. Yeah. Reflect and introspect on how you are feeling in the moment, right? And that forces you to bring yourself here. Don't think about what you're going to do tomorrow. Don't think about what's for dinner tonight. Don't think about what happened last night.
Right.
Just take a little bit of time and just think about what's going on within you right now in this moment. And this exercise will help you, bring yourself here, right?
I actually
how do you schedule time in your day?
I actually have it on my calendar in two places, Monday through Friday. So I have a morning routine block that I keep from 7 a.m. until about 8:30, where I do the same things every day. By the end, the last bit, 15, 20 minutes of that is me checking in on myself to see where I'm at, how I'm feeling, what everything I'm thinking about to make sure that I'm ready to go for that day. And then I start responding to messages from overnight. I look at email. I get into the things that are important. I've already gone through, in that last few minutes, I go through Sunsama and I look at my tasks. I look at my schedule. I make sure that I know what's expected of me that day. And then I go throughout the day. And as we talked about right at the beginning, I'll take a few minutes here and there to mentally refocus, recenter my breathing, just relax, walk away from the computer. I use a standing desk, so I'm able to walk around the house all the time while I'm on calls. And then I schedule it in at the end of the day as well. I actually have a work day, finalize the work day. It's a 15-minute, it's actually a 30-minute window in the last part of my day where I do the same things every day. I go back in and I make sure that I updated all the things in Sunsama. I write down the notes. I make sure if there's follow-ups that I have to do tomorrow, that they're tasks for that day. And I look at what's on the meeting schedule for tomorrow to see if there's any prep work I need to do overnight or, in the evening or whatever that might be. And since I started doing that back, I want to say that was October-ish last year, I have felt so much more in control of my day. It's amazing. It's that little bit of time. And I know it sounds weird if you haven't tried it, but man, it makes such a huge difference to know that I'm really going to have that schedule. And I don't take meetings in those times, with very rare exceptions, because I know that's how I prepare myself and get ready to go for the day. What about you?
Right. I do the same, right? So I like to spend some of that time in the morning in meditation as I start my day and make sure I come in. The big difference, and the reason why I love working remote, is that I get to spend the first part of my day in meditation instead of angry at other drivers on the road. Right. So I immediately start off right in a much better place. And as we talk about, what do you need to get into flow state? You need to be in a good mindset of where you are and what's going on. And you need to be able to be here and focused. And I do a lot of the same throughout the day. If I find moments in between meetings, or if I had a meeting that was particularly intense or something like that, I may pull some time away to grab that, right? And I do something similar. I like Sunsama in the morning and I hop in. So after I do my meditations and this and that, and then I hop in and start my workday. That's how I immediately start my workday, is looking at my day. And so this really does take us into the second tenet, which is analyzing where your time is best spent. Right. And, how do you enjoy spending your time in the day? What do you enjoy about it? And where do you spend your time, and where do you want to spend your time? And being able to go into your day, and with that analysis, both like you said at the beginning and the end of the day, because there's two things. There's the thing you plan for the day, and there's the thing you actually end up doing. Right? Yeah. And those are often wildly different, but they get better the more energy you put into them.
Very true.
And if you're spending more energy on your planning and the way that you're doing it, you can have more of a control of how your day goes. Right? Unexpected things will come up, but they won't shake you.
And it also helps for me as I look at what's on tap for the day. Let's say I know I have a deliverable, right? Whatever it might be. I have a presentation I have to get ready. I want to schedule in the time for me where I know I can best apply my mental aptitude. Whatever it is I have to do, I want time on my calendar that says it's blocked out for this. Whatever it is I'm doing, it's blocked out for working on this presentation. And that helps me then also to focus. It's another piece for me of getting into that flow where I'm not just trying to work on it in between things. I'm saying, no, this time's dedicated for that. And that I will take the time to really focus just on that. Now, of course, other interruptions happen. I don't control my whole day. There's a lot of people that, for the things that help me do my job, sometimes that's fixing blockers for other people. So I could get interrupted when somebody says, hey, I need your help here or there. And you have to learn to let that go. right? That yes, I may have said that this is what I want to do, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's how it will happen. I might have an interruption, and I try to accept it and move on, and then come back to whatever the task is that's at hand for me.
One of the benefit of the mindfulness meditation is allowing your brain that flexibility to task switch like that, right? Because you're right. You and I enable a lot of people in their day to day. Yeah. And it's hard to say, we could never just be like, don't talk to me for a day, right? That would just never happen. But what we can do, and one thing I started to do, I think I learned from you, was I block off time on my own calendar for me. Like, as I realized, especially as we started getting and using Sansama and keeping track of task lists, was like, I go day to day and I might have 10 things on this list, but there's nothing that says like, all these people reached out to me. I had all these other meetings and all these other things that I had to do. Right. And I found like there's things that I need to do individually I'm not getting done. And I had this mentality where I needed to keep my calendar available and open at all times. And I took this lesson with my email, right? Because I stopped living in my email inbox. And I've told you my quote is, if I lived in my email inbox, I would die in my email inbox. Oh, yeah. And without a doubt. I read an article one time. I'm going to have to find this one because I don't have this one linked up. But this is not my original thought. But it was, your email inbox is other people's to-do list for you. Right. 100%. And if that's all you're doing, then you're probably not getting stuff done. Yeah. And although I keep a majority of my calendar available for other people who need me, I do block off time here and there, whether it's like I need an hour. Yeah. And you're right. The mentality tends to be, I can work on this presentation in 15-minute spurts in between other meetings. But are you ever giving yourself the ability to get into full focus on it? No. Right. You need more time. Right. And so is it your best work? Like, yeah, you'll do it. But is it your best work? Right. And, what is it that you want to go forward with depending on what that meeting or presentation is? Is
that really how you want to represent yourself in that meeting? Mm-hmm. By saying, over the course of 4 days, I found 15 minutes 6 times.
Right, yeah.
Or could you just go find an hour and a half and focus and be in the flow state and actually do good work? And I think you mentioned email. And I think that's the third tenet in this, right? It's a distraction. It is other people's task list for you. If I know I'm a little different than most people. I don't have pop-ups for anything. So when email comes in, there's no little bottom flash. There's no blinking. There's no sound. There's no anything. It just goes into my inbox and it waits until the time when I've decided that I want to look at email, which typically is a couple times a day. If I have the time where I might be between meetings and I'm like, hey, let me just go check. Sure. Maybe I will get there. I noticed earlier today, thinking about distractions, we use Workplace, and I apparently had not looked at Workplace notifications in 4 days. I don't know how I didn't. I have a tab for it where I typically check it in the morning, but I apparently hadn't been looking. I'd been tagged in all sorts of things that I had just I was really starving those distractions. But other people had started to reach out to me in chat and like, hey, tagged you over here, need your input. I was like, wow, I completely missed that. But the idea of letting those tools work for you and not them owning you is really, it's a hard thing. Where everybody is like, oh, let me just go see what's going on over here. Let me see what's happening over here. You don't realize how expensive that context switch is for you until you're in the flow state, and for whatever reason you went and checked your email and there was an email about something that you had forgotten you needed to do, and your flow state's gone, right? It crashes all around you. And getting back, loading back up in that content or that context is really hard. Like, that takes a lot of work.
It is. And another, so if let's say you had those pop-ups and those notifications and so you're working on something and you get a notification. So of course it's a distraction. It's like the whole casino concept, right? The stimulus and all that.
Right.
So you're like, ooh, a shiny, a piece of candy, right? So you go over here and now you read this email. You're like, oh man, this email is going to take some serious thought and response. So I'm going to star it for follow-up.
Right.
All right. It's generally what we do if we even are going to get back to it.
Yep.
I'm very bad. If I read the email and don't respond in the moment, it's likely it's never going to get opened again. But let's say I do. Let's say I flag it for follow-up, And now I go back later in the day and I read this email again, right? The idea is that you don't want multiple touches. Like, why do I need to read this email twice? And so you mentioned this, like you'll go into them when you want to, and you do dedicate time for it, right? Yeah. For me, I dedicate time not at the start of my day, right? I used to start my day in my email inbox. Now, just before the middle of my day, like if I was going to take a midday lunch break, maybe the 30 minutes right before that, I'll dedicate time to email. And then I will be fully present with my emails. Right. And I will give the responses that I need and go through them. This makes sure, though, that I give one touch to each email and that I give it the attention it deserves, right, without having to come back to it, right? Yeah. So you also want to be fair to your email. And in being in it all the time back and forth is not giving it the right justice either.
No, it's not. And you are spending then, the multiple touches is multiple times. It's multiple interruptions. You're letting that one thing interrupt you a lot. So if you go and you read an email and you don't need to act on it, you don't need to follow up with it, it was informational to you, archive it. Get it out of your inbox so you don't have to go back and look at it again. If somebody replies to that thread, you know what'll happen? It'll show up in your inbox again. It's okay. Yeah. It'll be there and you'll be like, oh, hey, there's more information here. Scan it. Oh, no, nothing for me yet. Archive it. Let it go, right? Get rid of that extra distraction. There's a lot of talk about Facebook or Instagram and those sorts of things, but email is equally devastating to your workday. I'm the same way. I don't let Slack doesn't chirp or chime or anything. Workplace doesn't chirp or chime. There's none of that gives me the distraction. It allows me to be where I think I need to be, and when I'm ready, I go look at those messages. And I hope that people understand that. I try to be clear about that when someone says, hey, I pinged you about this 30 minutes ago. I'm not sure why you didn't respond. I'm like, oh, yeah, because I don't get notifications. Like I see them when I see them. And if it's not in the forefront of my screen, I don't see it. And my chat actually sits behind a couple other things that I use and intentionally use all day. So it could be behind it. It's not that I'm trying to ignore you, but I am trying to focus on what I need to do and what I need to get done.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue into the fourth tenet on here, which is don't be too busy to learn how to be less busy. We say it all the time. If you're busy, a busy person doesn't get anything done.
No, and right? I think the other side of that is busy is a choice, right?
Mm-hmm. That's what I was leading into. You say that a lot.
I say, oh man, I'm busy, and then I stop, and somebody say, oh, how are you? I'm like, oh yeah, super busy. Oh wait, no, I chose all those things. I didn't say no, or I didn't say not now, or I didn't plan them correctly. Like I made that choice. To your point, my life is my decision. No one else is responsible for it. These are the things that I've chosen to do. And I love the way this is. Don't be so busy that you can't figure out how to make yourself less busy. Just, you can't keep saying yes to everything. You need to figure out what are the right things. Where can you really put forth? Where does your effort make the most impact? And figuring that out is important for whatever it might be.
And you don't want to overcommit to your schedule, right? Because you need that time. If we look at the whole idea behind these tenets is finding solitude in your workday. And if you overcommit to your schedule, you don't have time for yourself. Again, you're not helping anybody. Right. In your mind, maybe by giving people more of your time, you feel like you're doing a better job or you're giving more back. But if you're not at your best, if you're not at your 100%, you're not in the moment with your mind, then you're not serving fully. Right. So taking care of yourself first is really important so that you can be the best version for those other things you need to take care of and make sure that you're giving them the proper care that they need. And that's how you actually are serving other people around you better, by caring for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting the way you put that, right? You're likely, you work at a company, you're a member of a team. Even if you're a one-man shop, you still have to take care of yourself. You have to be thinking about how can you best provide for the people who rely on you. So if you're a consultant, you have a business, you have a customer. If you're an employee, you might have a boss, a team, maybe you have people that report to you, you have peers. How do you put forth the best version of you to help with whatever it is you've been requested to be part of, right? You got hired for a reason. You have skills that people want. You're working on projects. If you're in a meeting and all you're thinking about is your email that you didn't answer earlier, are you really present in that meeting? Are you being mindful? Right? You're not. You're thinking about everything else that's going on. You're thinking about dinner. It happens to me, right? It's the same sort of thing when you're in meditation and a stray thought comes in and it's like, oh, what just happened? Where was I? And, we work remote, so we can't even use that excuse of, oh, hang on, I was going through a tunnel, I lost the cell signal. Or you're there. Oh, we joke about it, but you're there, but something happened, right? You got distracted because you're busy and there's so many things going on and so much vying for your attention that you do have to find a way to block out some of those things. It's okay to minimize the chat app, right? It's okay so that you can focus on a meeting and have a conversation. There are some things we do at work where we joke about the fact you have to have a buddy in order to have a meaningful conversation or you'll get confused. Well, if you and your buddy are having this conversation and you're distracted, now it's your buddy and half of you, and you're probably going to get to the wrong answers. And that's not fair to them, the time that they're committing to this, nor is it fair to you or the outcome you're trying to get. So it's a different way of thinking about it. I suspect a lot of people that are listening are going to be like, oh man, I don't know about that. I can read email and listen in on a phone call and multitask and this, that. I can too. I used to be able to, when I worked in an office, I could be typing an email and having a conversation with someone who was in my office at the same time and maybe have a phone call in my ear and do those three things at once. None of them are getting my full attention, but I might be solving all three problems, but definitely not the best of me or what I could do if I were just to say, hang on one second, let me answer this email, and then we'll fully focus on what it is you need. That would have been a better way of providing what I do and being more present.
Right. No, that's a good point. So the very last one on this infographic, and I know we're going to come back to email and stuff like that, but create a stop doing list, right? And I'm just going to read this verbatim from here, but what meetings can you politely decline? Or which email threads could be a 2-minute phone call? Figure out things that pile up your to-do list and add them to a don't-do list. Yep. Be deliberate about eliminating things that burn you out. So there's something that you brought up last year is we have chat, workplace and workplace chat, and we're very disconnected, right? Because we all work from home. So it's almost the same thing. Like if you got into a text conversation with someone and it's starting to get to a point where communication is breaking down, you just pick up the phone and call. And I remember you said that and it was like, if we open up a group chat and we're deliberating over something, maybe it's a prod support issue, whatever it is, something some people aren't sure about, rather than everyone just trying to, be talking in this chat, let's get on a phone call, right? Does it have to be the super long email thread or the super long chat thread to bring it into our context? It could just be a phone call. Get into a hangout, get into a meet. Let's visually look at something and let's just talk it out, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes a meeting. And then on the other side is sometimes meetings are set, which could just be emails, right? Maybe it was just a question or two that needed to be asked, and it could have been done asynchronously. Did 15 people need to get together for one person to answer one question, right? And just finding that balance of when's the right. So there's no like black and white on this, right? It's just you have to use your judgment in the moment. And again, that's being in the moment about your decisions.
Exactly.
And when you're there and then you're deciding, how do I get through this? We have to schedule a lot more meetings than we normally would, as we talked about in the remote management, because we don't run into each other in the hallway.
Exactly.
So I have to schedule random interactions with you in order to be able to bounce ideas off of you. So some of those things are there, but sometimes they could be less than they are, right? So just making sure that we're using the right thing.
Yeah, if you find yourself in an email thread and you're going back and you've now replied 3 times and you're still getting questions, look at that person's signature and their email and get their phone number and call them and solve it. Like, get it done. That's something that you could finish right away. You don't have to go back and forth. Clearly there's some sort of miscommunication where you're not on the same page. That's okay. That's what the phone call's for. Be like, hey, here's what I'm trying to say. Oh, no, this is what I was trying to say. Done, right? You no longer have that problem. It's been solved and nobody had to have 19 emails, right? It's just, there it goes. I like the idea of a stop doing list. I have a packed calendar a lot. And so I also think about how do I go about my day of the things that I'm not going to do. And I really focus on, like, I'll look at a meeting. Maybe I have 3 meetings at the same time. Well, which one of those had an agenda where I felt like I could contribute.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I look for first. If there's no agenda, I'm like, ooh, that's pretty high on my don't do list because I'm booked, right? I have a conflict. So I have to make a decision based on the information available. And if there isn't an agenda that's for one, well, that one, the one that does have one, if I can contribute to it, is a little bit higher priority for me then, right? And I'll reply back and say, hey, I didn't see an agenda.
You can prepare for it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what this is about. I want to be able to contribute, but I don't see what this is. I'm also double booked. Can you tell me what it's about? And can we do it a different way? And I try to be polite about it. Some people, when I reply back and say, hey, I didn't see an agenda, so I had to decline due to a conflict, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe you declined my meeting. But most people are like, oh yeah, hold on, this is what I wanted to talk about. Or they'll say, do you remember that conversation we had, 2 days ago where you said, hey, let's get some time? And I'm like, oh yeah, I do. Sorry, forgot about that. Definitely need to meet. Can you send an updated, meeting for this time? And, make sure you just put in some notes so that I'll remember what it is when it's not forefront. And those are the kind of things that help you, at least help me, feel like I have a little bit more control of my day, that I'm able to do things that are meaningful and spend the time that I have. Obviously, you mentioned you're in this moment. It's the only moment you have, and your time is limited. Like that's the one thing that you can't get back. So make sure that you're using the most of it. And we all take great, I hope, satisfaction in the work that we do, and we feel like we're making a difference and we're doing something meaningful. So make sure that the time that you're spending matters and that you're doing the right things. It's, you and I have talked a lot about the joy that we find in the roles that we're in. And it's because we make a difference and we work with great people. And we have an opportunity to do fun things. And we have, the challenge of solving some really hard problems, but it's fun. We have a good time. It's not that we're so busy that we, everybody's all stressed out. There might be a lot going on, but we do a pretty good job of, let's take a minute and really think about how do we stay mindful and grateful in that moment.
You touched on a couple of things there, and I think you definitely converted me. I was really bad, I'll say, about putting out calendar meetings out there with no information in them. And, and you pushed back on that at first, and I realized, that makes a lot of sense. And as my calendar started filling up more, I started applying that to my life. And I got to a point, I think about a year and a half ago, the way that I welcome people to the company, like when new people start, and I'm like, hey, welcome to the company. Here's Jira. Here's Confluence. Here's this resource. Here's how you get here. And don't ever send Steve Lev with a calendar invite with no description or agenda because he won't go to it. And, it's like, it makes sense. You kind of have to explain that ahead of time because it's a really important tenet because people need your time a lot. And so then you have to look at how are you spending your time? And it makes sense for you to be able to be the most present or me to be able to be most present when I go into meetings because there's a lot expected of us. And the more we know ahead of time, the better we can prepare, the more mental energy.
Right.
I may block off 15 to 30 minutes before the meeting to really put a lot of mental energy into the content of the meeting.
Right.
So when I go in there, I'm there and I'm present and we can solve problems together.
I have a Friday routine talking about how do we schedule time for ourselves. My end of the day Friday is review my calendar for the next week and go look at all the meetings that I haven't accepted and see what they're about. And are there things that I need to prepare? And if there are, I go put tasks in my Sunsama that say, you need to do this and do this and do this, whatever they might be, so that I can be ready to contribute in that meeting. If it's an informational meeting and it's not something that that I need to present in, but there's people that want to tell me information, then I want to make sure that I know what they're talking about, what that context is going to be, so that I can ask the right questions. Like I'm trying to be prepared because I feel that it's kind of like when we talk in software about communicating contracts, that's what a meeting invite is, right? It's somebody saying, we want to talk about these things. And then everybody else that agrees to attend the meeting is like, yeah, I have meaningful information that I can share on those things. We're doing a kind of a look through a lot of engineering about what do we have for standing meetings that we could get rid of? Are they really useful? And that's how I look at them. Is there something happening in here where I feel like I can contribute? And if I can't, and but there doesn't seem to be a value, then that's the kind of meeting I want to talk about. Is this something that we could maybe do without? And those are hard conversations to have sometimes, because people get attached to the meetings, and maybe they don't think about them, and maybe I attach way more significance to it than someone else. But I don't know.
I think it forces, as a meeting organizer, it does a couple of things for you too, and there's a huge benefit. One, it forces you to think about the necessity of the meeting, right? Because again, at a remote company, it's so easy to be like, oh, I need to talk to Steve. Let me just go find open time on his calendar and schedule a 30-minute meeting. It may be a 2-minute conversation,
right,
that I could have just picked up the phone and called you right now or something like that.
Right.
But it's, forces you to think through the necessity and kind of that stop doing list, right? Could this meeting be an email? Could it be a chat? Does it need to be a meeting? And then what's the content of the meeting and the agenda, so that when you're in the meeting, you actually make sure that all the things you cared about were discussed, right?
Yep.
I have Steve's time, I have Imran's time, Kirk's time, whoever it is, I've got someone's time, and I care about my time and I care about their time. So I want to make sure when we're here together that I get everything, my objectives are addressed, right? And so I don't want to miss on anything. So it's forcing the organizer to be more prepared for the meeting. It forces the other attendees to be more prepared for the meeting. And it allows for a more productive conversation. Right. So we're not having meetings for the sake of meetings, but we're actually getting something done.
I have a feeling that every person who's listening has had that, right? Meetings for the sake of meetings. Somebody wanted to hear themselves talk about something. And they've probably been like, why am I here? Why am I doing this? When I set up a meeting, I try to put in at least an agenda. And if I know what I want out of it, I will write in there, the goal of this meeting is to whatever it might be. I define what I need from it. Like maybe I need a better understanding of what a patch is, or I need to understand how we're addressing some new feature, whatever that might be. If I'm setting up a meeting, I try to put in the agenda so that I'm not scheduling anything that is blank, right? And I, just today had a meeting about, we had to do a summary for another set of meetings we've been having. So we literally scheduled time on the calendar so we could focus on it to build the status update slides for a meeting later in the day. But the agenda for that meeting was figure out what we've accomplished and how to display it in a meaningful way so that the attendees of this next meeting, where it was for, would get value from it, right? So that's weird to have a meeting about a meeting, but we needed time in a calendar that's full to dedicate to that, to make sure that we were in the right mental frame to be present, to make certain that when we walked into this big status meeting, everyone knew exactly where we were.
Right. And I think my favorite part of your meeting agendas is they always end with the question, what would this look like if this were easy? And it frames how you go into the meeting. Because, you're right. Like, what would this look like if this were easy? And how do we talk about it in that context?
Yeah, that's a funny one. That's something that came out of one of my business school classes was, what would it look like if we did it in a different way? And what would it look like if it was easy? And it is a funny mental prompt. Like we talked early on today about, how do you prepare yourself for the day and what do you want to accomplish and what do you want to do? But if you go into every meeting and say, what would it look like if this were easy? I worked at a manufacturing plant for a while, and every meeting there started with safety. So the person, whoever called and organized the meeting, had to give a safety tip of the meeting about anything, any sort of safety. Like if you're walking upstairs or downstairs, always hold a railing. Mm-hmm. Always. They were so focused on safety. And they also had a giant board that you saw in a lot of places that said, our last accident that caused, loss of, or injury to person was like 400 days ago. That was their whole culture, was around safety in a manufacturing plant. And that has always made me think about, what is it that we want? Where are we? And I love the idea of, what would it be like if it was easy? And you don't always get an easy answer. But man, it's great if you can frame that question in, what would it look like if this was easy and we were actually able to get there, and people will come in thinking that, right? It's fun. Most of the time when I put that out there, it's more of a challenge to people to stop thinking about the hardest, most complex way and really take a minute to do that. Like we started with the divergent thinking of, well, what's another idea? What's something else that we might do, or that we might think about, another way to go about it?
Yeah. So, as we kind of recap our conversation, we talked about a lot today, and I think we didn't even get to half of the stuff that we really planned. That might be a whole nother episode, and I'm excited to do that next week.
Yeah, I think so.
Now that I realize as we're going through this, I know that will be so. But for today, that mindfulness, being able to think in different ways, divergent thinking, convergent thinking, flow state, right? Finding solitude in your day, being able to meditate. There is something I know that I want to bring up. It is an app that you had mentioned and brought up to me called Headspace.
Oh,
Again,
sure.
something we're not affiliated with, but I remember what I liked about them is they have these little 1-minute things, right? And if you need some instruction, you need some guidance, here's a free app you can download and do little meditation practices and build.
Great idea.
I know Alexa had a skill. Give me 1 minute of mindfulness, and then she'll just kind of start a timer. And that's all it's about. It's just literally a 1 minute timer. Someone turned into a cool skill, but it's the user experience, right? Alexa, give me 1 minute of mindfulness. And then she'll just beep after a minute, or tell Siri, just set a 1 minute timer and close your eyes and focus on your breathing. But, being able to bring that in.
That's such a simple thing. And I think if you try it and you feel, for me, the first time I did it, I felt that calmness right there of, oh, wow, okay, hold on, that's better. And everything relaxes. You get some of that stress out of your shoulders. It really is an amazing change that is so simple. I'm glad you brought that up. That just 1 minute, that's all it takes. You don't have to dedicate to it. You don't have to learn how to sit with your feet curled up so your heels are on your knees and anything. Just sit down, close your eyes, and breathe. And enjoy it. Would love to hear from you guys. Those that go out and try it, feel free to comment, reach out to us. Try it. We really do mean it. It's a great way to just recenter yourself and be mindful, be present, be part of what's going on. Yeah.
And so as we end, I'm going to do just a little quick shameless plug of, my sister-in-law. She's got a company. She made us these awesome T-shirts.
That's right.
Move out of the camera.
It's fantastic.
The exec.
Yeah.
Her company's called Glow Your Soul. We'll put a link to her shop.
Yes,
candles,
please.
T-shirts, whatever. It's really awesome stuff.
Love this shirt. This is super lightweight and fuzzy. I'm loving this shirt. It's so thank you very much. That was awesome. I'm glad she could do that for us.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the talk today.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Architect and the Executive, a podcast by Imran Kassam and Steve Ledwith. We hope you enjoyed this episode and encourage you to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. All of our episodes, show notes, and articles can be found on our website, thearchitectandtheexecutive.com. Thank you.